Welcome to A Culture of Curiosity, a podcast delving into the school experiences of millions of children around the world. This is a curious podcast for educators by educators. And I'm Jack, a belonging and inclusion specialist.
And I'm Maureen, a former head teacher and now leadership coach and SEN specialist. We're talking all things inclusive education, creating a culture of curiosity around situations and dynamics that exist in every school, every day.
So whether you're a teacher, leader, or just passionate about creating schools where every child gets to belong, you've ended up in the right place. Well, Mo, we have officially made it to a third episode. So this week we are talking about what I think is again becoming a bit more of a buzzword. And it's a buzzword I'm all for if it gets us talking, but that is the term belonging. It's a term I love. I think if I ever get one of those sort of drunken tattoos that reflects my career, it'll be the word belonging somewhere. But we're really lucky this week. We are joined by the lovely Paul Bray. Paul, hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Jack. Maureen, thank you very much for inviting me. I have one issue. Why am I third?
I knew this was coming.
Number one. Anyway, I know there's probably issues. Maybe my people didn't speak to your people, and maybe I was.
We've only just got the rider.
I'm not quite sure what happened, but okay.
We took all that time separating the green Skittles out, and so it took eight.
Well, thank you. They've arrived, so I'm glad you read my rider correctly.
Paul, are you happy to tell us a bit about who you are? I mean, it's no secret that the three of us know each other, but...
Yeah, okay. So I'm Paul Bray. Some people might recognise that name from a book I wrote a little while ago, which was providing relationships and sex education for special learners. A lot of work around RSE, a lot of work around safeguarding, behaviour consultant, ex-teacher, ex-school leader, ex-pupil that left school with no qualifications and no way forward after being humiliated and ridiculed through a draconian, nonsensical behaviour policies that schools had when I was a lad. And in fairness to my teachers, they were absolutely spot on. I did leave school with no qualifications and started working on a building site, which is pretty much what they said would happen. Education and me weren't great mates. But I had a second chance. I took an opportunity to join a community theatre project. And it sounds all very, aren't you such a lovely person going to help the community? There was a girl that I fancied who was part of this community drama project. So I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go. And there I met a social worker and an old teacher of mine that never actually taught me, but was in that school. And after this, it was a massive project. And we was working with every person from the community that you can imagine. I was asked the question, I think you'd be a really good teacher. What would go into teaching? To which I said, well, I can't. I've got no qualifications. I've got tattoos that are even spelt incorrectly. I don't think that's probably the route for me. But I was persuaded, and back then there was a thing called access to education.
Yeah.
Remember it, Maureen? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, do you know what? I'll give it a go. I'll try it for a week and see what happens. And I generally thought, and it's probably for the rest of my career, I've just been going, I'll see if I last another week. I'll see if I can make it another week. And that's kind of mindset has stayed with me, I think.
I think this will be great once I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
He just carries on and on.
Yeah. Clearly, very long story short, I kind of got through that and I got into higher education and I became a teacher and I thought, brilliant. It's going to be completely different because, I had 10 years out of education just working and living life and, the way normal people do, I suppose. So I thought this is going to have changed. So I went into education thinking, and I went into mainstream education first of all. I went into education thinking this is going to be great. I'm going to be surrounded by wonderful human beings, my colleagues, wonderful. And I was bitterly disappointed. I had colleagues that, we spoke about this before, I had colleagues that generally thought, why do you work with kids when you don't like kids? People doing some really peculiar things. I guess I kind of went into education thinking I wanted to be the teacher that I needed when I was because I wasn't necessarily a bad lad. I just didn't react very well to people telling me what to do because they were a teacher. Yeah. And I say this, I mentioned this to my mum a little while ago when I was in a kitchen and looking at many magnets. The only person that can tell me what to do because of who they are is my mum. And she has a magnet on her fridge and it just says, because I'm your mother. Because teachers are teachers and they think they can force you to do things, I was kind of resistant to that. And I found the way things were taught very obscure and obtuse. And I just needed someone to kind of spend some time with me and maybe show me a different way and explain things. I never got that. So I thought, this is going to be the way I'm going to go forward. And that kind of took me into specialist education, I suppose, and a variety of roles. Always had a kind of pastoral behaviour kind of element to all my roles. And then when it's obviously it's like specialist, and that was you have some letters, you have a primary or secondary diagnosis, we'll take you. It was 2 to 19, and I kind of did a lot of the age ranges and a lot of the different cohorts of learner. But then I focused in on SEMH, and I head of a post-16 provision for about 8 years. And then within that, I guess other things kind of took off. I became a Thrive practitioner, which I still involved with Thrive. That means an awful lot to me. Do safeguarding training, and obviously my relationships and sex education research started because my teenage gang were getting themselves in all sorts of trouble, and it was just understanding that the only thing they didn't have was that kind of idea of what's acceptable and not acceptable. The idea around consent, the idea around some young men were saying, because I fancy that girl, clearly it's going to be reciprocated, because that's genuinely what they believed.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it was just, I guess, all my various travels and offshoots have been because I wanted to find a way of solving a problem.
I love it. I love it.
So I was going to do a thought tickle to get you warmed up, Paul, but I think you're already tickled. So I shall do it anyway. Now we're all nicely tickled. I shall tickle you some more.
Oh, thank you.
For the listener who's joining us for the first time, our thought tickle, our podcast is called A Culture of Curiosity. So to get that curiosity going, we like to have what's called a thought tickle for us to all ponder. So Paul, I shall put this to you first.
Okay.
If you had to give up one modern convenience for a month, what would you choose and why?
Could I have a replacement if I gave something that? For instance.
It's already bargaining.
No. Yeah.
Well, I can't.
Typical SEMH. Already looking for a way round.
I'm sorry. It's the way we work. I'd give up showers.
Okay.
Why would you give up showers? Because, I mean, I am for those that are watching in black and white, I'm a bald man and I shave and I go into showers quite a bit. But what I don't do, I don't enjoy the pamper. I don't enjoy the soap. So I'd give up shower, but I would revert back to baths, nice bubble baths.
With you.
Yeah, and just have a soak, bit of music, glass of something nice, and just try and find a bit of me time rather than, I've got to grab a shower and go to work. I've got to grab a shower because I stink. So I'd give up showers if I could bargain and have a nice big bubble.
Well, you're talking to somebody who genuinely ends every day with a candlelit bath with my book or my iPad or something perched on this custom-made stand that I have that goes across the bath. And it's got the drinks holder and it's got everything
I'm
else in it.
resisting the temptation to ask you the obvious question, but I won't.
I am alone. But that's the point. I just, the last hour of my day is just spent in this perfect isolation and solitude. So I'm fully on board with the bath idea.
Thank you. Clearly, I didn't think very much about that. Jack, do you?
Well, I've been distracted by the fact that I feel like my baths are a bit lacking in kind of suave, and I don't have a custom-made device. I barely get I'm 6'4". I barely get my knees in. Where is the book stand? Right, what am I giving up? See, I struggle to answer this question because I think I'd start bargaining like you, Paul. So at first, my gut reaction was I would give up my phone because I don't love, that's not true. I don't love phone calls that could have been something else. I quite like a chat and a catch up, but I'd much rather, go for a wander, let's sit and have a coffee and do it together. So then I thought, I could give up my phone and give up phone calls. But then equally, I live life with this kind of bizarre confidence. I'll watch a DIY video and go, I could do that. Or I'll find myself in the middle of Edinburgh going, figure out my way around here. I know exactly where I'm going. So I rely on Google Maps a lot. So then if I give up my phone, you'll find me circling, the outskirts of Hull somewhere, thinking that I've walked from Edinburgh to Aberdeen. None of those situations are ideal.
Phone though. Yeah, I think that's healthy though, isn't it? I guess that's healthy.
It does. I can understand about the phone function because I don't like speaking on the phone. Yeah, yours actually links to what mine is.
We should have
Because-
rehearsed this, Mo.
I know. I would give up sat-nav.
Ooh.
The reason for that is just like yourself, Paul, you had an incarnation and a life before teaching. And my life before teaching, I was a town planner. Yes, that was what my degree's in, town planning. So maps and finding my way and knowing how towns and knowing how places evolve, because they all evolve along a very similar theme. And if you know that, you can never really get lost because there is a real logic to where places are and what direction to walking if you want to find somewhere. And I did that as my degree, and I worked as a town planner in Oldham, actually. And then I decided to switch into teaching, and I've become far too comfortable with just tapping in a postcode. And every so often I think, well, actually, have I still got it? Have I still got the capacity to just work it out? When I did a master's in civic design, and one of the things that at Liverpool, and one of the things that we had to do was something called perceptual mapping. And they literally just took us out and they blindfolded us.
Okay.
And they literally sort of drove us off in minibuses.
You sure this was part of the course?
Well, they said it was. We never heard about it again.
Extra credit.
Nobody else who did the course ever actually remembered it happening. No, but they threw us out and said, right, get back to the university.
If that was Jack, he'd be in a different country.
Yeah, so I think I wish I could get out of my lazy rut and every so often just go back to using those skills to find out where I am.
I like that, going back to your roots and understanding that actually. I mean, I do love old maps. I've got pictures of old maps of various places that I've lived and families come from. But I do not miss trying to find a venue, an obscure venue, like looking at me A to Z as I'm trying to drive. And yeah, it was all just too much. I mean, I resisted the sat-nav for such a long time.
Yeah.
People used to call it rude things, didn't they?
I get very frustrated when I ask people directions and they don't know how to give them. They talk too much and they give too much information, and I'm like, just give me the facts. My sister, I will be on it, she may well listen to this, but she will preface any direction with telling me about all the things that are along the way to ignore. Well, if I've got to ignore them, don't tell me, because all I will be thinking of now is looking out for things to ignore,
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think, I don't know about you, Jack, but I tend to, and this might say more about me than I should share, really, but it tends to be via pubs. Go down to the Black Swan, then turn left, keep going till the Ship Inn, and then second right, and then you'll be where you need to be, or wherever it is. So that's not good, is it?
I couldn't possibly comment, but I would probably agree with you. I do think it's worth paying you a compliment, Mo. You said, I want to make sure I've still got it. I can attest to the fact that you've definitely still got it, because Mo and I spent a day together in Manchester. Now, my working knowledge of Manchester is pretty rubbish. I know where the train stations are, and if there's an issue, I can walk from Oxford Road to Piccadilly. And that's as good as it gets. And Mo was telling me about her sort of town planning history and her ability to figure out the logic. I said, right, well, I'm putting my experience in your hands as we entered the Arndale Centre. There was this beautiful confidence that I brought into her. She said, it'll be over this way. And I said, right, but okay, we've done that. How do we get out? It'll be this way. Follow me. And she was right every time, every single time.
I hardly ever go into the centre of Manchester, so I genuinely didn't know where the hell I was. And Manchester changes every 5 minutes as well, so...
You're just relying on the fact I wouldn't know any better.
Making it up she was going along.
That false confidence was my entire 21 years of headship. In a nutshell, believe me.
I'm going to get found out soon.
See, that is the bizarrest of things that bring us together. I love that. So, Paul... I'm curious now. I mean, you told us a little bit about your sort of, career and entry to education, but what was it around the sort of worlds of inclusion that really kind of, set you alight?
It's not necessarily a particular time and place, although I do remember something kind of reaffirming my gut belief that actually, if we're an inclusive society, we're a better society. And this involved a thing called the Kilders Challenge, and there's a Kilders Forest up near Newcastle way up towards Scotland. And it's lost its funding now, but there was a national competition called the Kilders Challenge. And what it involved was mainstream students combining with special school students as a team, and then you'd be able to go into, we had ours down in River Dart in Devon, so we used to go there against other teams, and it would be an outdoor problem-solving challenges, lots of things that you had to solve all these problems, but you had to work as a team to get over the line. And I remember the first time where it was a good friend of mine, Brian, if you're listening, you'll remember this. So he brought his teenage students from the local mainstream secondary school into our school, and you could just see the fear, absolute fear stamped on these children's faces. Gangsters 1 minute, all of a sudden quivering wrecks the next, because to a special school. And it's just the noises, isn't it, Maureen? You get kind of used to it after a bit, don't it? But you go into a specialist provision and it's just a different atmosphere. And then just seeing these young people, both from my specialist provision and Brian's mainstream work, genuinely over time coming together, working things out, and then having success, because we won 2 out of the 3 years we entered, we won the Southwest Regional Finals. But the lasting impact that had on everybody. But my initial thought, it was going to be really good for my guys. Really good, just to be able to engage with the mainstream peers. But actually, the biggest impact it had was on the mainstream pupils and learners. And we had the one that kind of really rings for me is we had one of those young men who was very disillusioned, and Brian picked him to be on the team because he was finding life difficult. When he left school, he applied for a teacher assistant's role at our school, and he was brilliant. And he's since gone on and opened up an outdoor activity centre, specifically an inclusive one, so everyone can upsell, everyone can canoe, everyone can these things. And I just look back and think that experience of an inclusive program God changed that young man's life and his view of disability, because we do have a very skewed idea of what it is to be able-bodied or disabled or have learning disabilities within our world, and the reality is so much different. And I think and it's just something that I've just generally always believed in. Surely, together we can achieve more. And if some us need a little bit more help than others in certain areas, then it's on us to provide that help and support. And I go back to the idea that the arguments and frustrations I have with people around advocating for people with learning disabilities to have relationships. People have a real kind of blind spot to that, almost like where they can't. You see things that have been published over the years. They're either aggressively promiscuous or they have no interest at all. You can't have both, can you? And I think the bottom line for me, every time I get asked an awkward question around inclusion and or advocating for people to have a normal life, is go down the human rights route. Yeah, we're all human, and therefore we're all sexual beings. We're full stop. So that's your answer. The next bit is where do you go with that? Once you've got that can't be argued with, can it? So yeah, we've got to be more inclusive.
Absolutely. Thank you. The idea of and the title of the episode is actually about we can all belong. And so we talk about inclusion and we can fall into the trap being from within specialist settings of just really having in our own heads an idea of what inclusion means and thinking that that's universal. But the word belonging, which is becoming more and more prevalent, and I personally am happy to see that, it's not the same as inclusion. So for you, Paul, what would you say was the difference between inclusion and belonging?
You can tell me I'm included. You can tell me that you are an inclusive organisation, an inclusive school, an inclusive whatever you want to be. And tell me what you want. But if I don't feel I belong, then you're not. Just you're not. Oh, you can you call yourself what you want. But I need to feel that I belong. And I need people who are in my school or in my organisation or in my company even to feel that they belong there. And that's difficult to measure. It's difficult to assess. I know before we were recording, we were starting talking about Ofsted criteria about how they're going to measure inclusion and the like. And clearly, attendance isn't going to measure that. But a sense of belonging, how do you measure a sense of belonging? And I think for me, we've done some work with various local authorities around supporting foster parents and adoptive parents and social workers around this idea of identity and belonging for children that are in care. For me, I think it goes back to the individual and understanding who they are and who they are in the organisational, in the greater world. And so it's about developing a sense of self, sense of personal identity. How do you fit in with the world around you? But actually working on self-esteem. So we should acknowledge that actually a healthy, strong relationship, the foundations for that is good self-esteem. And I think developing good self-esteem develops a sense of belonging, however difficult that might be. And we can slice it all up, can't we, into whether that's a cultural sense of identity or a language sense of identity but if we go back to the bigger picture that I said before, and I know this is like broad brushstrokes now, ultimately we're all the same. So how can we promote that idea when there's so many people want to divide us and put us into little pigeonholes and categories? And I guess
there's more that connects us than divides us.
Absolutely. And I think that we need to call out anything that it doesn't encourage a sense of belonging for everybody, because we certainly all belong on this planet. I know macro, micro, but we all belong. And so we've got to make sure that we advocate for those people that find the idea difficult or inaccessible.
In delivering behaviour training, I spend a lot of time focusing. Obviously, most of the training I deliver is to either school or care settings, and it's about children, educators, it's about children. But most of the time when I'm talking, I really, really preface everything I'm saying is, this happens because you are a human being, not this happens to children. This happens because you are a human being. And a lot of the analogies I use, people who know me won't be surprised to know I use an awful lot of storytelling when I'm delivering training. And I use analogies about adults I know and things that have happened in my life since I've been an adult, and then equated it back to the experience that the child is having, because it's a fundamental thing that connects us. And so many of the things that happen in schools are about actually being a human being and being at certain stages of your brain development and being at certain stages of your experience in the world. But there isn't this sudden moment where we all suddenly have all the skills we need and no longer feel like that. We just get better at coping about it. You're so right about the idea of belonging just being that feeling of feeling welcomed, feeling valued, feeling that you're seen. And I don't know about you, Jack, because, from my experience as a black female, I can go into schools, and as a child and now as an adult, I can walk into those settings and see the word inclusion. Actually, almost before I see the word inclusion, which is invariably written in the reception somewhere, I know that I stick out like a sore thumb and I am going to be everybody's curiosity for the next however many hours or days or whatever that I'm in their company, because you feel it. And if you know when you feel it, but more starkly, you know when you don't feel it.
Yes, that was a beautiful way to describe it. Actually, when you don't feel it.
It's an interesting thing to think about. I love the way that do you know why I love working with Mo is she's got this really wonderful ability to put things, and my brain just goes, oh my goodness. So I think about why we don't feel it, and I think I've done a bit of work around the sort of polyvagal theory and Deb Danner and the gentleman before her, and those signs of safety and what that does to a sort of mobilized nervous system when we don't see those cues and signs of safety. And that has such a detrimental impact on how we feel like we belong. Because you're right, we do notice it when we don't feel it, and we can't see it, we can't kind of be part of it. And this is where measuring it becomes so difficult. I'm going to give you quite a niche example, but I love niche. It's always the question of how on earth did you find that? There is a film, and it's called The Queen of Ireland, and it's a kind of documentary film about a drag queen in the Republic of Ireland that sort of became the sort of spearhead of the same-sex marriage referendum. And she delivers this speech. It's called Panty's Noble Call to Arms. It's a great watch for anybody that wants to go and have a look. And she talks about what it is that people who don't allow her to belong do to her, and what is it, and often what that lack of belonging can cause those of us who don't feel like they belong to do is to kind of turn inward, on what is it that makes me so separate? What is it that gave me away as being something outside of that kind of parameter? And that's not a data-driven thing. I can't always put into words or give an exact example about why is it that I choose to cross the road sometimes, when it's January, it's dark at 5:00. Why are there moments where there is something in my experience that have told me that actually in this example, in this environment, in this scenario, that maybe I don't quite belong in the same way as others. And why am I checking myself? Why am I looking for things that might give me away as something else? And I think you're right. It's the bit that we can tell when we don't feel it, not necessarily go looking for moments when we do feel it.
I guess that's why we sometimes see people become, tribal's not the right word, but people look for like-minded people. People look for people that have experienced similar situations. And then the misunderstandings can form from that because you're only having those conversations and kind of reaffirming that idea that we don't necessarily belong. And if this little pocket don't belong, and this little pocket don't belong, and this little pocket don't belong, then all of a sudden, we're parts of little groups of people that don't belong.
It can very easily turn into a siege mentality almost, can't it? And it comes us and them. And how do we avoid that? But it can also be that it can happen on such a fleeting, outwardly superficial level. Some people will recognise this, some people won't. It's what we call, as a black woman, they call it the black nod. You're walking down the street, and if you see another black person, whenever I go anywhere new, the longer it takes for me to get a sense that it isn't a monoculture, that, the more I'm actively searching for that. But you'll see another person and cross them in the street, and you just have this little slight nod of the head. And it's just this sense of kinship. And actually, it's all right. I see you. And it isn't even that there's any threat or danger. It's just, I see you. And it's that acknowledge of seeing one another. And that brings us back to that idea of belonging is about being seen. Because when you're actually naturally seen as in the context of inclusion, I think maybe that's what actually makes it feel safe. That's what takes away that anxiety. That's what takes away that hypervigilance. You can step down your hypervigilance because you get this sense of, see who you are and what you are as an individual, and we don't care.
Exactly.
And as soon as you feel that, you can relax. Not belonging means you alternate between feeling highly visible or completely invisible. There is no in between. I don't know whether he'd agree with that, anybody, but it's one or the other. It's extremes.
I really like that analogy. To this point, I'm going to suggest that is what Jack has tattooed on his back.
I'm worried about the surface area required.
Of it, It's interesting, isn't it? And of course, I can't say that I have experienced anything that you guys have experienced, clearly. If we're talking about little pockets, I like to think I spread myself over all sorts of different pockets, but that's probably not the right way to describe this. But I was talking to a charity that I'm going to do some work with in Kenya in November. I'm going over to 2 weeks to do some safeguarding work and some work around SEN schools there. And they're very conscious of the fact this idea that the white saviour is going to come in and kind of sort everybody out.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, as you were saying that, I'm wondering that clearly I will be different.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's going to be great. And I've been lucky enough to do. I remember teaching in Vietnam for a bit, and I did some work with British Council, setting up actually the first school links between Vietnam and Britain, and walking down Hanoi Street, and people looking at me like I'm some kind of giant, Jack. Yeah. I'm tiny compared to you.
Yeah.
But it was just like, oh my God, it's just free. So yeah, I'm going off tangent a bit. I mean, and I think for that piece of work, I'm very conscious of the fact that I don't want to go in and go, look, this is how to do it. I want to go in and have conversations, and I want people to I wanted to kind of get this kind of train the trainer idea, this model. Have you thought about approaching behaviour in different ways? Have you thought about safeguarding and thinking, what do you need? And just going, look, give me that I'm white and fat and bald, but I'm just. But sometimes we need to be conscious of it, because when I was asked, I just said, yeah, not a problem. And it wasn't until the head of the charity started talking about, mindful that,
Yes.
while we're doing things for the right reasons. And I have to be conscious of that and think, I truly believe I am. You've got to question yourself sometimes as well.
Well, it's that listen to the message, because the message is coming from a place of positive intent and positive regard. And that's what you pick up on, isn't it? It isn't necessarily whether or not someone says the wrong thing or does the wrong thing. It's whether you can pick up on the place it's coming from.
I think that reflection is really, really important, because actually when we think about what some of the barriers are to inclusion and that real heartfelt kind of living and breathing of belonging, we have got to talk about unconscious bias and that reflection, because actually there's a quote that Maureen gave to me and it's completely blown my mind. I'm going to try to quote it back to you. And Maureen said this to me and it completely set sort of the fireworks off for me, in that I haven't walked a mile in your shoes and that you haven't walked a mile in my shoes, but we buy our shoes from the same shoe shop. And that reflection around our own experiences and how those experiences might well present us in a situation where we do carry an unconscious level of bias. And we've got to be able to reflect and check that sometimes so that our bias doesn't become this kind of narrated existence for others. We get back to that question, don't we, of we can't just tell people they are included, that they belong. When do we ask the people who should belong how they feel around their ability to belong?
What can we do to help you feel that you belong? And that's surely, if we want people to feel comfortable, and we know, don't we? People will develop and people will learn, if we go back to education, when they are in a safe environment with safe people around, they feel secure. That's when we can see belonging. There's lots of really good examples and good schools dotted around. And, I know you're familiar with Roger Mitchell and the stuff that he's doing in London. You lose a child from the school, you lose the child. And the fact that he won't ever exclude anyone and making sure that you are welcome, you belong. And I guess it's trying to learn from places like that and individuals like that to say, okay, well, that's really good practice. Let's see. What is it you're doing to making it work? Share that. And I think that there's a lot of really good people, and I'm so thrilled that I get a chance to meet some amazing people like you two doing what I do, that actually it really needs a kind of coordinated effort somewhere along the line. So we can become kind of a lobbying group of sorts. And I don't necessarily mean, let's go down protesting down the street, but I'm quite happy to do that as well if we need to try and change policy and try and change what's our priorities. Let's keep to schools. As educators, what is our priority? What is the role of the school in 2025? Well, it's completely different than it was in 1815 when Joseph Lancaster decided, we're going to bring a carrot in as well as the stick. We'll not only will we just hurt and humiliate, we'll bribe you as well. Pretty much is what he was saying. But having that idea in education now is wrong. It hasn't worked for over 200 years. Why do we think it's going to work now? Why do we think we've got people not attending school? Why do we have people with such high levels of anxiety? And we can point fingers and go, it's all down to COVID, clearly. We were on that route. COVID just kind of racked it up, sped it up. We were already going there because we're not fit for purpose.
No.
We're not doing what we do. And we are not going to have children that make the right decisions for the right reasons whilst we are making them feel not included, when we are punitive in our approach to their communication and we don't offer a sense of belonging. We're not going to improve. And they're not going to develop. And they're not, because we know this. I mean, I can't remember the lady's name, but a fantastic psychologist in the States. And there's one clip she does, and she's talking about the brain, and we're looking at brain scans, and she's saying, look, we can see the impact that this is having on children's brains. Now we know what's happening. What are we going to do about it? And I need to find their name, because otherwise loses all context. But that's it. And on other courses that I do, I leave it on that question. Now we know what's going on. What are we going to do about it? Because we can't carry on the way we are. And if we are, let's not kid ourselves. We're not going to offer children that need a sense of belonging.
And in terms of that, that's where you start talking about the idea of microaggressions, isn't it? And the impact of going through life, going through your school career, not only having these tiny things, these barbs that are constantly attacking your sense of self and your identity as you're forming it, because you're not the finished article. You're far from it when you're a child, and far from it when you're an adult for some people. But it's that idea of not only having those slings and arrows coming at you, but then having no counter role model, having no representative, having nothing to actually balance out if you're not seeing that, and if it's not consciously and deliberately being cultivated in the school. And it's not about having quotas, it absolutely isn't, because it's a state of mind, isn't it? And so it's that idea of, if you don't see it in the adults in the school, if you don't see inclusion and belonging being modelled by the adults in your life, be that in school or in home or whatever, how do you possibly learn that?
We want to present the way and the behaviours we want to see mirrored back at us. As adults in children's life, we're massively influential, and we need to use that mindfully, but also very carefully as well, because if it's okay for us to be less than inclusive with our peers, and less than respectful, say. I mean, I've gone into schools where the hierarchy is male and white, and then the SLT won't have anything to do with the teachers. The teachers won't have anything to do with the teaching assistants. No one talks to the midday supervisors. And if it's okay for us as adults to do that and pick and choose who we're respectful for, what we're explicitly saying to the kids, it's okay for you. And so we've got to be really mindful about how we, call it what you will, call it quotas, call it positive discrimination, whatever it might be. We need to see, like you said, examples of that's where I could be. That's where I could be. I see myself in that person.
I think it brings us to quite an interesting point, because I think Mo, you mentioned it, this idea of us and them, and how we look to kind of reduce that idea. I give the example in an education environment. When I first started working with children, I spent a lot of time thinking about who I needed to be in that role, and it kind of felt cultivated and made up. And actually, it wasn't until I started to just be myself that for some of the young people that needed connection more than others, that was a bit of a deal breaker for them. Actually, that's where I started to become a little bit more open and approachable. But the big thing, the us and them in an education example, I think can be put into two, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but two ideas. We're a bit older and we're paid to be there. But actually, this isn't something that happens in silos. The very experiences we're talking about aren't exclusive to the young people or children that engage in our provision. And it's incredibly important that those experiences are accessible to the wonderful folk that make up our staff teams, because we've also got to talk about the kind of accessibility of a working culture where all this can happen. If I don't feel like it's safe to ask questions, to be able to say, but why do we do this? Why are we still doing that? We can't kind of be curious about the experience that allows for belonging if I don't feel it either. So actually, I think we've all got a part to play in that. But would you agree with me that there's quite a specific role for leaders?
In a leadership role, you have responsibilities. Of course you have. I always think it's up to the leadership or the leader or the leadership team to be almost the barrier to all the nonsense that's coming from external factors, whether that's DFE, whether that's Ofsted, whether that's parental practice, whatever it is. They are there to catch that and to deal with it and to empower their team, their colleagues, to improve their provision for their learners every single day, to be self-reflective, to look at things that haven't worked, to demand a culture of asking the why question, to demand a culture of saying, do you know what, I mucked up, I made a mistake, I need some help. And that's the role, to empower, to enthuse, to navigate, to spot talent, to think about encouraging people to take a different route, perhaps. But unfortunately, I guess we've all had this experience. I've worked in places where it was the complete opposite. they would open up that tunnel and let all the crap come straight down on top of the teachers, middle leadership teams, and because they were focused on themselves and the learners and not the staff team. And that's not the role.
No.
And, and if that's okay for the head of the school to do that or the leadership team to do that, then what happens? Everyone starts, like you said, Jack, everyone starts looking after their own class, their own subject area, their own department, whatever it is. And then we don't have an inclusive school anymore because everyone's looking after themselves.
I really like that idea of the gatekeeper, as it were. The leadership are the gatekeepers. They keep everything at bay and they filter what comes through and the way that it comes through and the message that you attach to it as well that helps to create that culture that you want to have in your school. And you gave a great list of things that we have to do in order to achieve that. And I would add, I agree with all of them, but I would add modelling. I'm not talking about runways and catwalks, but, that idea of actually, in terms of belonging, in terms of inclusion, I found it was really important to me that I modelled creating an atmosphere where people could ask questions and be comfortable asking questions around things that they may previously have deemed as sensitive. And so the way that I would create that environment was actually to share information and to share realities, and not in a inflammatory way, not in a controversial, just information. So when there were conversations going on that I knew that my reality was different, provided a different answer from the default reality of being in a European affluent nation, I would share that, and I would share it quite naturally within the context. It took me a long time to feel comfortable doing that, but that's what I did, because I thought it needs to be normalised that any topic or any issue can at any point throw up other perspectives than the one narrative that people may have been taught. And you have to make it in everyday life because it is everyday life and that's how you normalise it. So I would talk about, if we were talking about, for example, hair, then I would talk about it, and I was the only black person there, then I would be talking about it. And I'd say, yeah, but for me, what you're saying doesn't say washing your hair every day because, on a practical level, there's no need for a black person to wash their hair every day because of oils and all sorts of things, and porosity and all sorts of things. And so I would actually reference it not in terms of, well, I don't do that. I would actually reference it in terms of, see, that sounds weird to me. I know not in an inflammatory way, but I would actually put my normal in the centre and talk about what they were saying to me in terms of that's not my normal.
Yeah, that's brave. I mean, to consciously think, all right, I am going to flip a different narrative to this.
Yes, because everyone uses the word normal, but we all use it, and the massive danger of just using the word normal is that there is one default normal.
Exactly.
Everybody's got a normal. It's not the same.
We're back to that curiosity, aren't we? How do we create environments that are safe for people to wonder? When we make these big blanket decisions, when we get issued with that sort of, statutory piece of guidance, it comes out at one particular level, but then we're wondering, well, what does this look like for our community? How will this impact on the variety of experiences that are being had at any one moment within our provision by X amount of young people, X amount of staff, X amount of visitors at any one time?
Again, it goes back to priorities, isn't it? If your priority is attainment, if your priority is attendance, it's going to take you away from what is really, well, I believe, is really important. And actually, if you go the other way, you will have an impact on attendance and attainment anyway. But actually, what you're doing, while you're taking that detour, actually you're making the whole culture shift to a point where it's, well, hopefully, actually talk about succession planning, where if you could get to a point where you could leave that school and know that culture would. That's what we want to try and do, surely.
It's that big statement, isn't it? That years after we retire or years after we've sort of passed on, that people might not remember the nitty gritty of what it is that we did, or the plates that we kept spinning, or the hoops that we jumped through, but they will likely remember how we made them feel, or how we allowed them to feel in the environments in which we insist they show up to 5 days a week.
Yeah. And we've probably all used this question in various courses that we deliver. think back to your time as a learner. Was there a teacher there that you found it really difficult to get on with? So let's not use the too strong a word, but a teacher that you despised, maybe. And often people go, "Oh yeah, actually on that, if I did that, it might be because it was in Cornwall, but I did that in a group in Cornwall. Someone, oh God, yeah, on podcast purposes, I'm going to say Mr. Smith. Oh my God, yeah, Mr. Smith, he was an absolute. Also on that course was Mr. Smith's son. So I now caveat by, I don't want any names. Just think about a teacher in your head that you think, and yeah, everyone goes, oh God, yeah. I go, okay, right. Think about a teacher that you adored. You've got someone in mind. Why did you adore them? And like you were saying, Jack, there's a variety of things. They listened. They were kind. They had time for me. It all goes back to personal traits, not necessarily educators' traits. It reminds me, I don't know if you saw this, a few years back, an insurance company did a massive trawl and said, what makes an inspirational teacher? What is it? And there's a whole list. And the top three, by a long way, was they listen was number one. They don't give up on anybody. And they're willing to learn, I think, themselves. Those three. But the top two, top one was they listen. These aren't educators' traits. These aren't great traits from teachers. This is just good human being traits. And what makes a great teacher? Do you know what? Being a good human being makes a good teacher. And that's ultimately it. Only, you level that up and just say, when your time comes, when you're retired, your legacy as a teacher is going to have 3 different endings. Yeah, you're going to be adored, you're going to be despised, or you're going to be completely forgotten. Which one do you want?
I like that point about human being. I deliver a session every now and again to a group of groups of ECTs around how to be a new educator and a real life human being. What can these kind of genuine moments look like, and where do they exist? I think sometimes there's a kind of fear and anxiety around inclusion and belonging, and it's not so much that those fears aren't well founded. I can see how they would be driven of this idea that, but if I try and get it wrong, could I make something worse? And I think there we run the risk of, by not trying, we don't move forwards, that we will get it wrong. And as a concept in wider human life, but in education, I think a lot about the first time I ever apologized to a child.
But yeah, reaction.
The look of,
yeah.
And that's concerning, right? That's a worry.
Yeah. Well, it says a lot, though, doesn't it? I think it goes back to what Maureen was saying earlier on. Yeah, we might make mistakes. Yeah, we might get it wrong. But it's from where is that coming from? From what place is that desire to change things coming from? And if it's from a good place, it's from an honest place, then we forgive an odd mistake, don't we?
Yeah.
Curiosity is wholesome and it's positive. And we've had it from being children, the smallest of babies. The first thing you notice about a small baby is them being curious about the world. It's a really wholesome thing. And where it goes wrong, or where the narrative goes wrong, is when judgment slides in and people aren't conscious that actually what they think is curiosity is actually judgment and wanting to have biases either confirmed, really.
My daughter's boyfriend, Sid, I love Sid, he's ace. I mean, he's got lots of kind of, letters that put him in a pigeonhole, but he's just a lovely young man. And he finds school a struggle and he gets himself into trouble. Not because he does anything more than anybody else. He's just not careful enough, where other people will make sure that they are mindful about who they're doing stuff in front of and what they're saying. Reacts, responds, whatever it might be, he's always getting himself in trouble. And you think that that's not always the case. I mean, an example of looking for the wrong. I went to watch my daughter's class have swimming lessons. It was kind of, open to parents coming down. And I'm in this cafe. So this young man was in the pool and he was being splashed by these other kids, group of 3 kids, splashed them. Very mindful that, they were splashing him when the teachers weren't watching. And he got to a point, we were quite right. He thought, you know what, have it back,
Yeah.
Which one was sat on the side for all the swimming lessons? Because he's got a reputation. And that's it. You make assumptions. There is him again. Oh my God, here we go again. No, it wasn't, actually. It wasn't.
Yeah.
But that's what happens, isn't it? We presume. I'm really lucky. Helen Townsend is listening to this from Inner World Work and Beacon House and the like. She's a bit of a hero of mine, I have to say. She talks about the inner world and opens it up as a concept, a difficult concept for people, isn't it? But the resource is just unbelievable. She talks about what we react to, what we see and what we hear externally is not what's going on internally for a child. It's not. But what we do constantly as educators and just people, because we're humans, we react to what we see and what we hear. What we should be doing is responding to what might actually be going on internally. And that's tricky because you can't see it, can you? But it goes back to that last quote. Now we know this because we know it. What are we going to do about it? You know, we've got to be doing something different. And personally, going back to that young man I mentioned, he doesn't feel that he belongs. He feels he's on the outside all the time. And he's always picked on. He's always on a day's suspension or this, that, and the other. Telling you now, he's a lovely, lovely kid and he's bright as a button. And if he had the right person with a bit of patience and a bit of support, there's nothing that young one couldn't do.
I talk a lot about the CMH pupil and I refer, and I tend to do this, the more traditional the mainstream setting that I'm delivering to, or traditionally minded, the mainstream setting I'm delivering to, the more I will make of this point. But I will say, about how the kids with SCMH, they are frustrated leaders. So many of them are actually frustrated leaders. And the reason why it's working against them, whereas it worked for someone like me or someone who ends up in leadership in school, whatever, is actually because what they haven't got is an understanding of the influence of power and that power dynamic. That's what they need to actually be able to get to grips with. Because I bet we've all had it, where there were times when you were a child or early in your career as a teacher, where you could see something was wrong. You could see that there was an injustice. You could see that somebody was failing in their duties as a teacher and as an educator or as a leader. But you knew innately, I can't say anything now because the situation isn't right. I haven't got the backup. I haven't got the evidence. I haven't got witnesses. I haven't got the timing's wrong. The situation is wrong. Something isn't quite there that it will empower me to actually speak up now. And quite often it's that person, I've only been here 5 minutes. Or someone will say, how should you know? Or I don't care what you say. I've got the power to override you and everyone's going to listen to me. Quite often our kids who end up on that exclusion path, for me, they're frustrated leaders who don't understand how to factor in power dynamics.
I like that a lot. Makes perfect sense.
So how do we do it then? I'm going to ask you now, Paul. How do we do that? What simple and effective things can school leaders put into schools to actually help those kids feel that they belong, or to help the staff feel that they belong? What sort of things can we do? Has anyone got any thoughts?
I guess we could, what's called student voice, pupil voice, whatever you want to say, whatever we want to go around. And we talk about that a lot, don't we? Yeah. But in reality, the pupils don't have an influence on school life. Yeah. We've got school council, we've got representations from every various cohort on the school council. And they would like this, and they would like that, and they would like to see this change. It never happens. Let them have some influence on school. Let them have influence on policy. Let them have influence on what we do, when we do it.
Pupil rep on the governing body?
Why not? Absolutely. Why absolutely not? And if you give some shared responsibility and if you empower people to make choices, okay, they're going to say, we want ice cream every lunchtime forever, or whatever it might be. At some point, if that is encouraged and people that need understanding about leadership and they need to understand actually they can have influence, if they're shown that and their voice is respected and listened to, not just a tick box, genuinely listened to, then they're the more invested in their school, they're more invested in their place of education. Hopefully, they're more invested in their learning as well. So, we can talk about pupil voice and tick a box, but it has to be real and it has to be, again, it has to be inclusive. How do you find a way for everybody's voice to be? That's a kind of an easy tick box. Pupil voice, we've done that. We've got it sorted. but actually delve down. Maybe Ofsted should do that. Actually delve down to actually what influence has your school council had on policy? What influence has your school council had on curriculum?
Yeah, I guess what you're also saying though is that it really is taking in the voice of those who are experiencing the very, I don't like to use the word product, but they are very literally attending these schools, living and breathing these experiences, that if we were going to ask anybody, it's got to be the folk with the boots on the ground.
If we talk about schools as businesses, yeah? We talk about trust competing against each other and providing the rest of it, right? Who are our customers? Yeah. But in this organisation, in this business model, not only are the customers always wrong, we dictate what they can buy, how they can buy it.
And we get mad at them for asking for stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't, on any kind of model level, it just doesn't, when we say, does it pass the make sense test? It just doesn't make sense.
I do love that example, Paul, of what autonomy do we give the kind of young people and children that are attending our provisions? I saw a really lovely example not so long ago with a sort of group of schools that were looking at their approach to behaviour and their journey on a sort of relational approach. They had a really active school council. I got to sit in on one of those meetings. Best meeting I've ever seen. Honestly, I've never known anybody to get so much done. What was really interesting is what they kind of tasked the school council with was creating a kind of charter led and created by the children in terms of their view on relationships and behaviour. And I had to really try hard not to have a little weep in the middle of this meeting, because the first big question that was asked was, right, how do we make sure everybody in my class and everybody in your class gets to say what they think they should do? And I thought, oh God, they've got it. And they did a bit of work over a period of a term where there was lots of really wonderful conversations of how do we make the right choice? And if we need help, where do we find that help? And sometimes it doesn't have to be an adult that helps. Maybe I can help you. And then when I need help, you can help me. And they put together this charter. And we did a bit of work on looking at how many individual kind of voices had been heard within this project. Somebody whizzy in the IT department said that out of the 400 children within this group of schools, a pretty small group of schools, there was about 96% that had actively commented on, responded. And I thought, incredible, this is how it can live and breathe. And there was that really lovely moment also, that in those moments where things don't go as planned and things wobble because we're human, there's also that kind of buy-in for some of our young people, where we started to notice in some of our incidents or sort of logs that were recorded that kids started to say things like, but I think next time I could maybe ask my friend, or next time I could try a different choice. And the language started to really fall into what this charter had put together.
That's brilliant.
Honestly, my cold, dead heart was warmed. It was just beautiful, because it can be done. It really, it's not easy. Nobody's suggesting that. But it can be done. It can work.
I'm going to challenge again. We need to move away, I think, from the prefacing it's not easy. It is easy. If you care enough about it, it is easy. If you actually care, if it matters to you, make it matter.
Yeah, no, I get that more. Whether I misinterpreted what Jack was saying, it's not easy because you have to convince other people.
Yes.
That it's easy. And
that's the hearts and mind bit is the hard bit, yes.
As soon as you've kind of navigated that, of course, the route is clear, isn't it? But it's convincing other people.
Yeah.
I think you're right, because what we're also acknowledging, because you are right, it is easy. It can be done. It can live and breathe in every moment of every day. But I think the bit that is not as easy to get our brains and thinking around is that it isn't a sort of single line trajectory. It's not a piece of work that I can start and get done. It's something that I'll be reflecting on, thinking about, directing.
You gather it up and you throw it in the air
forever.
Yeah.
And I think of a ceiling fan. Do you remember, those old ceiling fans?
Yeah.
I think a bit that a lot of sometimes what we're doing is kind of gathering stuff together, lobbing it into the ceiling fan and seeing what comes back. Because it will never, the goalposts shift, that they'll carry on moving. And that's part of the beauty of the journey, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And the journey it is.
It is. And let's look at, just to sort of close this up and bring it to its end. So let's think, is there any one action from what we've talked about that we would want our listener to take away and to foster a practical thing for this week, to foster that sense of belonging in their space? What's the one practical thing you think someone could do to move towards a greater sense of belonging? Either one of you. I'm happy with you sort of kicking off with that one.
Me, it's practical ways is asking themselves, how am I doing this? We're all familiar with, talking to people about values and the rest of it. And words are words, yeah. Belonging, great word. Inclusion, great word. Just sit down with those words on a board and ask yourself, how am I achieving that? I know probably the question was, what can we practically do to achieve that? But I think we need to encourage people to reflect.
I think that reflection is a practical tool. It's the most it is an extremely practical tool. And then I would end my week with, how have I, my own personal values, sincerity, curiosity and joy. And I had sheets that I would have, and I would end every week with, how have I lived out my sincerity? How have I been curious, and how have I been joyful? I had to do that every week, kept it in my head. And nobody else saw it, but I just needed to do it. So I really am on board with that. I think that's a really good suggestion for an extremely practical one. How about you, Jack?
I think I'm going to go the other way. We, over the kind of weeks we've been recording this podcast, we've talked lots about approaches, relationships, pedagogy, curriculum, leadership, culture, and I think those are wonderful things that will all play into this kind of creation or hopeful creation that allows for natural senses of belonging. But I think if I was going to reflect on something, I would also reflect on if maybe creating those genuine moments of connection that can lead to belonging feels out of reach, inaccessible, something maybe you're already doing but isn't working. Well, maybe what we need to look at are, what are the moments that we're going the other way? What are the moments that are actually pushing young people and children further away? Is it that the only time I ever speak to little Jack's parents is to tell them that something's gone wrong? Is it always Jack's name on the board? Is it always, if I was to ask a group of young people, how did this happen? How did we get here? Am I noticing that this is Jack's fault? Where are those moments coming from that are maybe sending us the other way? And what influence can we have on those? And what does that do in the sort of spotlight of our practice and processes and policies and those kind of things?
It's easy to make a wrong step and carry on down the wrong route, isn't it? Especially when you haven't got an internal map, Jack. And you just go, oh my God, where am I? But I mean, from a practical point of view, just acknowledging why it's gone wrong. Right, isn't it? But it goes back to being self-reflective. It goes back to at least acknowledging something's gone wrong. Or not my fault. I was having a conversation earlier on with Jonathan Cobb, who's the head of the charity Send Foundation, and he's spent a lot of time in New Zealand. He's been back here for about a year now, and he said, one thing I've really noticed is that no one takes responsibility in the UK. It's always somebody else's fault. Or is that right? Am I getting that right? Or I don't know. You're absolutely right. It's always somebody else's fault. And at some point we have to go, actually, what did I do to make that go wrong?
What was my part in this? Yeah. For me, my one practical, I wish that someone would take away from this and say, just try this next week, would be try sharing one insight from your own reality, from your own lived experience that differs from the prevailing norm in your setting. Just try sharing one thing where your normal doesn't actually accord with everybody else's normal, even if it's down to people sitting, have their dinner in front of the telly, and that's become the prevailing norm. But actually, in our house, we still hold true that you have your dinner and you're in the dining room and you're in the dining table, and we have a conversation, and it matters to us. And that's not be what other people do. And it's not to say what's better. It's just to say this is why we do it this way, because
a practical activity just sprung to mind. Play this game. And you can play this game with children in your class, reflect on different people. But if you've got a group of, say, your staff meeting, okay, so in your staff meeting, if you're a head somewhere in a staff meeting, ask your colleagues to think of a young person that's caused them some distress, some trouble, someone you might have had to write an incident about. Think about those. Have them in the front of your mind. Somewhere on a bit of paper, I want you to write down 3 positive, lovely things about that young person. 3 lovely things. 1, you'll get staff that look at you and go, 3 lovely things. Oh, well, it's quite yes. And you'll get others that will write loads. And I went all that down, but do not put any reference to name, gender, nothing. Just 3 lovely things. I don't want any indicators of anything else. And then we play a game of name that child. And very often we can name that child based on these 3 positive, lovely things. I've tried it lots and lots of times. Vast majority of the time it works. And then halfway through, just reflect on all the lovely things that have been said. Just say, God, they sound like amazing people. They're helpful, they're kind, they're smiley, they're thoughtful, they're funny. All these things that come up. Aren't these kids amazing? I would love to work with these kids. And then say, okay, what if I'd have asked you to write 3 things that frustrate you about that young person? Would we identify that person any quicker? And I have tried it both ways. Answer's no. Goes back to this belonging thing, or this self-esteem thing. What do those kids think of themselves? How often are they reminded that they don't listen, that they're annoying, that they misbehave? They are reminded of their negative traits every day, from their family, possibly, from their peers, possibly, but certainly from you as members of staff. Don't forget that that's not who they are. They are all the lovely things that you have just said. That's who they are. When they are struggling, when they are finding life hard, they might present with things that frustrate you. It doesn't make them who they are.
Yeah.
So when people talk to me about, he's a runner, she's a this, she's a that, no, she's not. She's a wonderful human being who's got a gorgeous smile, who'll do anything for anybody. But when she becomes dysregulated, she finds life difficult. And then flip it on its head. Get the kids to do the same for the teachers.
Oh, that'll be powerful.
Amen.
That's a
words.
really powerful one.
3 words.
I wonder if anyone's brave enough in our listeners to do that and then let us know what the outcome was.
I love that. Paul, I think that's a really beautiful way to kind of finish our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been so lucky, a bit like I think you said earlier, that we do have this kind of beautiful community forming of practitioners that are really kind of on this collective journey with us, and we share and we help and we support and we cry on each other's shoulders and celebrate each other's wins. So thank you for being part of that with us.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.